Hey everyone, it's B007 back for another 10-minute movie review, and I'm so excited and thrilled to talk to you about the film Civil War, which was released this weekend in the UK and the US. I've just got back from seeing it on IMAX, even though it wasn't shot on IMAX cameras, looking phenomenal in that format. And mostly excited because I saw it in a cinema with amazing sound quality. And this is a film that is orally challenging, that is politically challenging, that has some of the most searing visuals you're going to see on film, and that is so vital, so important, and so intelligent in how it handles its politics. I think a lot of criticism that's been thrown at it about being apolitical or both sidism is unfair. I'll get into why. But most of all, this is a film that sits with you, that moves you, that provokes you to thought, and also features one of the most hilarious drop tracks of De La Soul's Say No Go. So what more can you want from a film? I don't know. So let's go back to the beginning. This movie, Civil War, has been written and directed by Alex Garland, who started off actually as a novelist, right, of the beach, and then has gotten into writing for film, directing film. He did the amazing TV show Devs, and actually a lot of the cast from that reappear in this film. He has come to represent, I guess, one of the most thoughtful voices about the real structural challenges facing us as a species, which I can't believe I'm saying that. It sounds so pretentious. But you think about a film like Ex Machina, which talks about the challenge of generative AI, the challenge of sentient beings being among us. You think of films like 28 Days Later, which was just so challenging and interesting at the time as a depiction of dystopia. And now with Civil War, a film that is tackling head on political divisiveness and everything about the current times in which we live that pit person against person, identity against identity, tribe against tribe, in an environment which is even more dangerous because of the way in which our social media is constructed and algorithms forcing us into tribes and bubbles, but also, sadly, if you're in the United States, a place where there are people with weapons. So, you have this level of violence that's even more amped up than elsewhere. Not just an American issue, though. We see the rise of populism around the world. So I don't want to come off as being bigoted against America. But I do want to say that I find it interesting that Alex Garland is the man who's tackling this head on in film as a Brit. Because I think as a Brit and as someone from outside of America, those images of the Capitol attacks were quite shocking. I mean, I'm a person who comes from a heritage of countries that are or would be seen condescendingly maybe in the West as politically unstable and dangerous, where there are political coups and you can't rely on democratic institutions holding up. I can tell you it was shocking seeing what went down in America, because as cynical and as knowledgeable as I am, we still have this view as America, Washington, D.C., this shining beacon of democracy, this romantic ideal, even though we know in our brains it doesn't make sense anymore. And I think it's fascinating that it's a Brit who's made this film. So, what is this movie? It is a road movie, basically. It's four people in a car going from New York to Washington, D.C. Those four people are journalists, they are the press, an institution that is very much under threat in our own world and in this dystopian future that is very similar to our own world. The key person in this foursome is Lee, played by Kirsten Dunst. She's a photojournalist, very clearly based on Lee Miller, who was the female photojournalist who was first into Dachau. That's referenced in the film, so Alex Garland is being very explicit about his references here. Also, I think based on Marie Colvin. And she is accompanied by, so she's a photojournalist. She's accompanied by Joel, who's played by Wagner Moura. Any of you who've watched Narcos will know him as the guy playing Pablo Escobar, incredibly charismatic and a really good counterbalance to Kirsten Dunst's Lee, who is very held together tightly, as if all her trauma might spill out if she cracks a smile. So Wagner Moura's Joel is just really full of emotion, full of laughs, shits and giggles, and he wants to interview the President of the United States in Washington, D.C. So that's why this car journey is taking place. They have two interlopers. We have Sammy, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson, who'll be known to you if you watch Devs. He is an old school reporter. It's implied that he worked or still does work for the New York Times. He doesn't think they should be going to DC, but he also wants that story. You know, he's the throwback. He's the guy who believes in old school journalism. And they have a very young, aspiring photojournalist who kind of blags a ride with them called Jessie. She's played by Kaylee Spinney, who you will have seen playing Priscilla Presley in Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. And in a sense, Kirsten Dunst is jaded and cynical and battle weary. And this young girl is so naive about what she's getting into. And there is a kind of mentor protege, unwilling mentor to protege relationship building here. And in a sense, the journey of the film is twofold, right? We're going from New York to DC to see what the hell is happening in America. But also, I think that there's a message about Generation Z and Jessie, these youngsters, and kind of her having to get blooded in this war. And the final scenes showing her who's been exposed to all this horrific stuff, kind of taking on that mantle as the photojournalist. I have seen some people criticize this character. I would say the only flaw I would find in this film is the final interaction between the two photojournalists. I'm not going to say more for fear of spoiling it, but I think I would have maybe played that slightly differently or written it differently. I think the performances are great on both parts. Kirsten Dunst, I mean, what a body of work over decades now. Absolutely phenomenal. But that central foursome is just compelling. You want to spend time with them on the road. They start off in a New York that is having power cuts. There are violent protests, suicide bombers are in the action. As they journey down, they've got to skirt round Philadelphia to somehow get to DC, which is the front line of the Civil War, then as now. Then as now. And, you know, they're seeing an America that's ravaged, that you don't know if you can get a petrol station, you don't know if you're going to be safe. There are clearly armed militia out there, people who have taken the breakdown in institutional authority as an opening to wield their own authority. And nowhere is that more chillingly conveyed than in a short cameo by Jesse Plemons, who, of course, is the real life husband of Kirsten Dunst. And he has a very small role to play, but it's absolutely, I think, the philosophical, political message heart of this film. And he asks a question of each of our journalists where, you know, they're kind of trying to plea for just, you know, we're just passing through, we're going to DC, we're the press, we're the American press. And he asks the question of them, what kind of Americans are you? And I think that, to me, is the line of the film, because it hints at the fact that it's no longer enough to say you're an American. There is no unity in the country, because you have to say if you are a progressive or a Republican or a MAGA or a whatever it is, what label, what qualifier, what identity you're going to attach to yourself becomes so important, or is so important in our contemporary society. Jesse Plemons is always phenomenal. I think most recently in The Power of the Dog, unbelievably good, but I love him as an actor. I've loved him since Friday Night Lights, and he brings such power to that scene, which, I mean, I want to watch this film again. I would gamble that scene is absolutely at the halfway mark of this film, and it tells you everything you need to know about the politics of this film. They get to Washington, D.C. What is the political setup of this film? It's caused a lot of controversy. Basically, there is a president of the United States, and it is not ambiguous. This guy is a fascist. How do we know? He's serving his third term. Well, we know that's illegal under the Constitution right now. We know he's abolished the FBI. We know he has ordered the army to shoot on American citizens. So this guy is a fascist. And later on, when they're talking about potentially getting an interview with him, Sammy, who's the older journalist, says, you know, these dictators always disappoint you when you meet them. Ceausescu, Gaddafi, when you meet them in the flesh, they are smaller men than you think they're going to be. So he's clearly bracketing the president in that category. So this is a fascist takeover of the United States. What is, I think, troubling to some people is that the people fighting this fascist takeover, or the two states of the Western forces, the WF, are Texas and California. So that's blowing people's minds, right? Because you have what's perceived to be a very right-wing state and a very left-wing state joining forces in this film, but you've got to free yourself from your contemporary politics. And you've just got to see this is the way the film's going to position it. Because after all, if they had made a film where it's just the, I don't know, contiguously what it would be in California and Portland Maoists, as they call them in this film, I mean, it's not going to work. You've got to have the two biggest states do it. They speak of Florida as well in the mix. So I think some people are finding that challenging, but why not give everyone away into this film? Why make it exclusionary? I think it works. What I think works really even better than that, however, is we see what happens when institutional law and order breaks down. And this was true of the US Civil War. This is true of the English Civil War. This is true of the French Civil War. This is true of wars, civil or otherwise. When institutional law and order breaks down, the worst elements of society fill that vacuum. They enforce their own power, and it is typically absolutely savage. So we see the forces of the United States breaking out against civilians, right, and just being vicious, enforcing this fascist president's rule. But we also see individual militia, as evidenced by Jesse Plemons doing his thing. We see lynchings. We see, even in this small, gorgeous little town, we see sinister guys with guns. So basically, where people are seizing power, it's being done so in a very sinister way. And then finally, when we come to meet the Western forces and we see their invasion of Washington, D.C., which is some of the most haunting imagery I've seen on screen in so long, we see them also doing things which feel extrajudicial, which feel like, why are you shooting the unarmed person in the White House briefing room? Why are you doing this, right? So I think there is a message there about how invading forces act. Maybe it's a commentary on what imperial forces have done throughout history. But I think the message that Alex Garland is giving in this film is there but for the grace of God. When we're photojournalists, and at one point Lee Miller, the character, says this, when I was shooting wars abroad and I was sending those pictures home, I was sending them home as a warning, don't do this here. And I think he's making a point that however this fascism begins, and whoever of the states comes together to fight against it, it's going to unleash the worst of us, right? It's going to be something that shows you the darker side of humanity. So it is absolutely not mincing its words about what is beginning this civil war, which is a fascist takeover of Washington, but it is showing you nuance on what happens. And anyone who knows anything about the US Civil War, Reconstruction, how that all played out, will know that this is exactly what you should be showing. I cannot speak highly enough of this film. I think it's beautifully shot, beautifully acted. I would love to see Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons up for awards for this. I think it packs an emotional punch. I think there are images that are just haunting, and I really hope it serves to tell its audience on both sides of the political aisle, look where this leads if we don't find some kind of common ground and some kind of ability to talk through our differences in a civil manner, pun intended, as opposed to splitting into identitarian tribes where one side's good, one side's evil, and conversations impossible, and we are only left with the most extreme options. This is filmmaking at its finest, and I hope it gets the audience it deserves. Civil War is rated R. It has running time of 109 minutes. It is currently on release in the UK and the US. It is no coincidence that it's been released on April 12th, 13th, the anniversary of the Battle of Fort Sumter, April 12th to 13th, 1861, the start of the US Civil War for real. There is a haunting lesson from history there, and I hope we all heed it. Whatever you think about this film, I'd love to continue the discussion. You can find me at bina007.com. You can leave a comment on the YouTube channel. Find me on Threads or Twitter, bina007. I'd love to hear from you. In the meanwhile, if you are American, if you are any citizen fortunate enough to be in a true democratic country, not a fake democratic country, use your votes wisely and engage in political discourse, because we need actual political discourse to take place to prevent the most extreme reactions to the current divisiveness. Posse out.